now resume.
Thank you. Start again with you, Mr. Hill. How often is monitoring data submitted to the province? Or I should ask you, I'll ask both, mines and mills, if they're the same, if they're different, you can tell us which is which.
The frequency of reporting generally reflects the frequency that the sampling has to be done. Pulp mill reports in our region are generally submitted monthly, and the mines are submitting quarterly.
Is there a requirement in permits for mines or mills to report non-compliance, where they have done monitoring and they found that their mill or their mine is not compliant with the permit? Are they required to report specific non-compliance to the ministry?
This isn't consistently done, but there is some permits have a clause that requires reporting of non-compliance. That's a new thing that's being incorporated in some of the permits. All the permits would have a clause that requires reporting of emergencies, unauthorized discharges, and equipment malfunctions.
Okay. On the permits that you've negotiated, have you ever included a term that the mine or the mill must report non-compliance?
Not to date, no.
For mines, quarterly results are submitted to the province. That could result in quite a time lag before the province would know there had been an exceedance. It could be 60 to 90 days if an exceedance happened early in the quarter. Is that a concern to you?
Yes, potentially. If we get a lot of monitoring reports submitted to us with a lot of data in there, and if it's not brought to our attention, there may be a short lag before a non-compliance is addressed.
And why do you have a quarterly reporting for mines and a monthly reporting for mills? Why are mines not reporting on a more frequent basis?
Well, most of the data collected is on a quarterly or annual frequency, and only some of the data is on a monthly basis for the mine site.
And why is that?
Well, it's just generally that receiving environment data for the creeks and the groundwater are monitored at a quarterly frequency, and the actual discharge point is monitored more frequently.
Okay, why do you not have a more frequent monitoring requirement for mines than in the receiving environment?
That's just a general practice. I guess it would depend on how, for instance, groundwater, it would be slower to respond to some kind of input than other sources that you monitor.
But the mines would discharge into flowing water as well as groundwater, surface water as well as groundwater.
Sorry, I couldn't hear what you said there.
The mines would discharge into surface water in addition to groundwater, right?
Well, most of the mines don't have a direct discharge. There, as Bob mentioned, they have maybe non-point discharges, seepage from pits, etc. And so they wouldn't all have direct discharges to surface water.
They may not all, but certainly mines do discharge into surface water.
Yes, some do, yeah. And those are covered, the ones that are covered by the Metal Mine Effluent Reg.
Okay. And wouldn't it be helpful to have those data from those mines reported on a more frequent basis than every quarter?
I suppose so. I guess we have to strike a balance. At some point where we could have them report daily, or we could have them report weekly, or it's. I guess it's a convenience for staff to get all the data for all the sites submitted in one package. As I mentioned, we do get a lot of data that comes in, and with workloads, it's hard to get through all of that stuff immediately. And there is clauses being developed for reporting of non-compliance, and it would be helpful if there was some kind of a provincial-wide policy that gave some direction as to how we were to deal with developing clauses for reporting of non-compliance. It's so far only been included in some of the more recent permits, and there's a number of different ways that clause has been drafted, so we haven't landed on one consistent clause for reporting of non-compliance.
RISS electronic database for recording monitoring results that the federal government maintains. Were you aware of that database?
No, not previously.
Okay. Would that database provide the province with useful information in its work?
I don't know. I'm not familiar with what's in that database, so I couldn't tell you. We do have a system called EMS that is a repository for monitoring data, and generally the labs that are doing the analysis for the companies are submitting the data straight from the lab to EMS and I believe to the federal system as part of their service that they provide.
Does the ministry keep a record of compliance activities in relation to permits?
We have a spreadsheet that we use to record when inspections at sites are done, when monitoring report reviews are done, and that's maintained by the environmental protection officers that do that work.
And that we have an example of that at tab 33 in the Commission's documents. This is what you're talking about?
Yes, it is. That would be an example.
Can I have that mark, please?
1037.
And this will record not simply prosecutions, but all types of compliance work that is done in relation to permits. Is that right?
Yeah, that's right. It records inspections. So under the column where it says activity, there's MDR, which is monitoring data review, and then there's INS, which is inspection.
This is a question for both Mr. Hagan or Ms. Boyd and the provincial witnesses. What information is shared between the agencies? We've heard today about some discussions on identifying relevant parameters for the permits. What other results are shared, or what other data is shared between the province and the federal government on these two different industries and their effluent discharges?
Well, I guess I'll go first. In my experience, it's generally the larger reports, and the actual data is being reported, as mentioned earlier, to the two separate databases.
So when you say the larger reports, would that be like an interpretive report under the Metal Mines Act or regulation?
Yeah, the interpretive report or annual reports that the mines that aren't covered by MMER that have to submit annual reports under the provincial permit.
So annual reports prepared by the province would be shared with Environment Canada, and interpretive reports prepared under the metal mine regs would be shared with the province?
No, the annual reports are prepared by the permit holder, usually with their own staff or consultants. That's the annual reports I'm referring to.
Under the provincial regs?
Under the permits.
Under the permits, the provincial permits?
Yes, under the provincial permits.
Okay. And what about enforcement actions? Is that information on enforcement shared between the province and the federal government?
I can't answer that. In the Conservation Officer Service does enforcement for the BC Ministry of Environment. We do, the environmental protection officers do the inspections and review data. If they're to recommend enforcement action be taken, that would be turned over to the conservation officers, and I'm not sure how they share information with their counterparts in DFO or Environment Canada.
I was just going to add to that. We do actually, I have been party to where for pulp and paper issues, if there have been there may be a provincial direction for something, and there may have been federal direction. We have met and exchanged information in sometimes trying to develop a compliance strategy, but it is more like the enforcement groups, but we do that. There is sharing of information. And then there's also, for pulp and paper, we do share the interpretive reports, the design reports, the submissions that are given to the mills.
I guess I could also say that permits that are issued will be sent to us generally, and we may recommend that some parameters be included or some items be included in the permits, so we can have offer some feedback on provincial permits. And the province, as a courtesy, may also quote federal regulations in their permits. So it's just another method by where the operator may be able to get a better idea of what requirements they need to satisfy for both our levels of requirement.
We also have a specific instance where we have multiple dischargers on in the Kamloops area, and we got together a group of dischargers and government agencies to share our data, share our work, and with DFO, Environment Canada, provincial agencies, and local government municipalities that have discharges, regional district, First Nations, and other interested parties.
Do I understand in British Columbia, if a party wishes to explore or create a mine or develop a pulp mill, they would essentially have to deal with the province, perhaps Environment Canada, Department of Fisheries and Oceans, and then at the local level as well. Is that correct? There's no one-stop shopping in British Columbia for those who are engaging in an activity that might impact upon environmental issues. Is that correct?
As far as I'm aware, although I know provincially we've developed a new organization, Forest Lands Natural Resource Operations, where they're trying to get together almost all of the provincial agencies that deal with that sort of thing, land use. For some reason, environmental protection wasn't included in that, but we still work very closely with all those agencies.
You know, these questions are again directed to both sets of witnesses. I'll start with maybe the federal witnesses can answer first. Does the federal EEM address cumulative effects of the introduction of mining and pulp effluents into the freshwater system?
The short answer is not yet. I just say not yet because I'm hopeful. But after pulp and paper, we saw the need to try and consider other discharges. But not enforcing, but enacting the regulations and introducing the environmental effects monitoring, we now start with pulp and paper. We've brought in mining 10 years later, and now we're at the stage of introducing municipal wastewater regulations with the intent to include EEM. And so there's potential to be able to go in that direction. I think we can get there, and I think even some of our research scientists and some of academia, in particular one fellow, Dr. Kelly McKittrick, who was actually part of the original EEM program development, has an idea of how you can move towards cumulative effects monitoring across. He's kind of gone from province to province and looking at that aspect. So I think we should go in that direction.
In the province, do you do any, is there any process to assess cumulative effects from mines and mills generally?
I don't know if we approach it in quite that way. I mean, we look at all impacts. I don't know if we really think of it as being cumulative, as just being the impacts of the mine or the pulp mill. I've never really understood the term. I mean, I understand it in theory, but I don't understand in practice how you'd... I mean, it seems like anytime you monitor, if you're downstream of two discharges, that will be a cumulative impact.
Has any work been done by either...
I was going to add something
to
what Bob said, is it may be something considered in an environmental assessment process rather than in the individual permits. And there is cooperative federal provincial trend monitoring stations on the Fraser River that would be able to track changes over time that might be from cumulative effects.
Has any work been done by the province or by Environment Canada to assess these effluent discharges on migratory salmonids? Maybe, do you want to start with the federal?
Okay, sorry.
Yeah, okay, go ahead.
The short answer is no. We have not targeted migratory, the salmon, just for the very reason that they are migratory, and our focus is on resident fish, which we expect would be exposed more than the migratory fish.
But what you haven't done any assessment to see what happens as migratory fish move through different discharges in their life cycle?
Right, no,
Okay.
not to my knowledge.
And the province?
Basically the same thing. I mean, not only do we not try to look for sockeye or salmon in general because they are migratory, there are a lot of species that are resident that are exposed for their entire life cycle that would be much more likely to be impacted, such as rainbow trout. But even rainbow trout aren't necessarily the best species to monitor because they are also migratory, at least within the freshwater system. And we often look for species that are much more resident, territorial, and don't tend to move as much. And often looking at sculpins or long-nosed dace or chub.
If I could add, just in the environmental assessment process for new projects, if there is a potential impact on migratory salmon, or if there is a potential for discharge from a new project in Salmonberry Creek, then that is certainly an issue that would be looked at very seriously. And if there are potential high-risk impacts on that resource, it would certainly affect the conclusion drawn during the environmental assessment process for that project.
And would such an assessment address the impacts on a migratory fish as it moves through the river and is exposed to different pulp mills through its life and different mine discharges through its life and different other effluents through its life cycle? So that sort of not maybe sublethal combining effect as it moves through the different discharges. Has that been looked at by Environment Canada?
No, that is not what we're looking at in environmental effects monitoring. We're looking at particular mines or mills doing an EEM program. Remember, we're assessing the adequacy of the regulations here, so the presumption would be that a resident fish would be more highly affected by a mill or a mine effluent. I can say possibly in the future, if those effects are unacceptable on resident fish, then we could certainly move on to look at if there were impacts on transient species. But that would be a question of what to do later on, and that's not really been addressed yet.
All right. Is there, and this is for the panel at large, is there a way that cumulative impacts could be assessed differently or better to better understand impacts on sockeye in the Fraser system?
I think the short answer is yes.
Do you have any suggestions in that respect?
I guess just even for starters, trying to bring some of the different groups working on, like within organizations and levels of government research science, just together to try to come up with some kind of a strategy that would do that. I think it's an area that we might have shied away from more just because it's a difficult task to try and do, but I think it's just something we've got to kind of move in that direction. I guess I should add, for the environmental effects monitoring, we have actually, the Upper Fraser Mills did use juvenile Chinook, which overwinter in the Fraser, and that was in part because we were having difficulty in getting the mature large-scale sucker. Although it probably didn't work as well as we had hoped, but we did at least try to use that species.
Anything that provincial witnesses would like to add to that? No? All right, thank you. Those are my questions. Canada is the first up, and Mr. Timberg has indicated that he will try to be done in half an hour. If you can do it any less, that would be great.
It's Tim Timberg and my colleague Hugh McCauley for Canada. If we could, Mr. Lund, start with the PPR number 15. And I have a series of questions for our witnesses regarding a number of the paragraphs. And if we could start with page 6, paragraph 5. Is it? I'm wondering if it's important to, if you have any comment to clarify the statement in the PPR that there is a discharge of millions of liters of effluent into the habitats of Fraser River sockeye salmon on a daily basis. If you could, do we need to clarify that statement?
I guess one of the things I just thought would be helpful would be a bit more context. I think factually it may be correct, millions of liters, point sources, toxic, cumulative, bioaccumulative and persistent substances. But I guess given the relative change in discharges, say over the last 20 years, like for example, significant decreases in pulp mill loadings, and from the toxicity perspective, now requiring non-acutely lethal effluent. I just think it would help to have more context, and also on a daily basis, the Fraser sockeye wouldn't necessarily be in the river, like there'd be like passing through. So it's just context for like versus on a day-to-day basis what the time periods are, and some of the relative improvements in the river. I just think it would be helpful.
Okay. And Mr. Hagan?
Yes, I've got maybe 4 points that might be helpful with respect to effluent discharges in general here, and one of them might be is that some discussion in the PPR and the technical report for that talking about the amount of effluent that is discharged from mines, and the numbers reported there are generally the permit maximum. And I'd just like to point out that very often the actual discharge from the mine is considerably lower than what they may be permitted to discharge. So that's something to keep in mind. It's quite often that a mine needs the water, and they recycle that water from their tailing pond back to the mill, and they use that water in their process. So in fact, Highland Valley Copper does not have a discharge because they're using that water. So supernatant water may be actually quite a bit less than they're permitted to discharge. I just wanted to mention Gibraltar's discharge is actually an intermittent one. They do not charge between November and April during the winter low flows. That may be something that the province can speak to as a management action to try to manage that effluent discharge for a more favorable environmental impact. And also we had some discussion about the Highland Valley Copper, whether they had an effluent discharge or not. And I just want to clarify one of the reasons for the apparent discrepancy between provincial recognizing discharges and federally we do not. The MMER had very explicit definitions of what an effluent is. And if the effluent, for example, is emanating from a closed part of the operations area, which was closed when the MMER was promulgated in 2002, then we would not consider that an effluent. So that could explain discharges from the closed Bethlehem pit or Highmont pits or tailing ponds. They're not effluent under the MMER. Also, we may have a situation such as Highland Valley Copper. I'm not sure if they're actually discharging their aquifer water, dewatering around the pit, but they're not doing that. Well, they talking now that a possibility, a mine is entitled, and in fact we prefer them to discharge or divert clean water around their operations area so that water does not enter into the operations area. And that water would be a clean water diversion and is not an effluent. So there's a couple of items like that here.
Thank you. Mr. Hill or Mr. Grace, did you have anything to add to that? You were lobbed a few questions there.
One thing that maybe I could add to that is, perhaps in terms of context, what's needed is an inventory of the actual discharges of the different contaminants of concern from the different sources, and what proportion of the concentration of those substances those discharges represent in the river. Otherwise, the comment there, number 5 and number 6 there, are fairly generic otherwise.
Okay, thank you. Ms. Boyd or Mr. Hagan, do you agree with the statement that Section 36.3 does not oblige DFO or Environment Canada to take any positive steps.
I guess just it would be useful to clarify that it could be argued that just not depositing a deleterious substance into waters frequented by fish in itself is a positive step. And also, before you get to prosecuting, there are tools that the enforcement officers have available to them that can work to bring a discharge or a facility into compliance before going to prosecution. So I just wanted to bring up those. I think those are useful to include.
Mr. Hagan, are you satisfied? If we could then move to page 65, paragraph 176. The question here is, does this description accurately reflect how the Department of Fisheries and Oceans, Environment Canada, and Health Canada work together on dioxin and furan monitoring?
Yeah, just to clarify how this is actually working at that time, we have 3 agencies, each with their own mandate to deal with various parts of this issue. So we work cooperatively in this program. So with actually Health Canada that would review the data that was collected. The data that was collected on dioxin and furan levels in fish and sediment. Environment Canada had the mandate to issue directive to require the operators to collect that information. That information would be sent to DFO, who would get a health assessment recommendation from Health Canada regarding the significance of those levels, whether they were a danger to human health or not. And then under their mandate, DFO could issue a closure or a health advisory or whatnot for a particular area. So our 3 agencies had separate issues or separate mandates that we could bring into play on this and cooperatively try to manage that issue.
We could then move to page 70, paragraph 193. And is this statement
I believe, I think this one has been corrected.
okay.
This was the one.
I'm
yeah.
just wanting to
Sorry.
clarify, is this, did we correct that this morning?
No, I forgot to change that one.
Okay, so if we could just, could you comment on this statement that there are 139 coastal BC pulp and paper mills? Is that, should that read 10?
In that period, it should be 10.
So it should not read 139 mills, it should read 10
No,
mills.
that might just have been confused. It's probably roughly the number of mills in Canada, but just a type. Okay.
Thank you. Then if we could look at paragraph 196. Does the effluent testing focus only on acute toxicity?
For pulp mills,
Or tend to focus primarily on acute toxicity?
for environmental effects monitoring, it's got sublethal toxicity testing included as well. So it for the non-EM part, it's on acute toxicity using rainbow trout, 96-hour LC50, and Daphnia magna toxicity test. But for sublethal, for the environmental effects monitoring, it's got the sublethal toxicity testing
Okay.
that's conducted twice a year, as Wendy had noted this morning.
Okay, thank you. If we could then move to page 75, paragraph 203. And Mr. Hagan, does the Huckleberry mine discharge to the Fraser River basin?
I just clarify this, the Huckleberry mine discharging to Tatha Reach on the Nechako Reservoir, and of course this Nechako Reservoir has 2 discharge points, through the Camano diversion and through the area on the east side. So the Huckleberry mine discharges to Tatha Reach, and the flow in that reach is primarily towards Camano. So I don't know that you would be able to say that there would be much effect from Huckleberry on Fraser River. It's kind of a gray area when you've got 2 discharge points there now.
Thank you. If we could then turn to page 79, paragraph 217. And Mr. Hagan, do we need to clarify anything about the comments here about the tailings pond and how it's described here?
Okay, we talked about this, and I can't quite remember what we wanted to clarify. Speaking, I think I addressed that already. Supernatant discharge from a tailings impoundment, there may not be as much of that water as you might anticipate because it gets recycled back to the mill.
Okay, thank you. And then paragraph 273 at page 102. And do we need to clarify the statements in this paragraph with respect to EEM programs, biological monitoring, and their requirements?
We just wanted to clarify that the requirement for a fish survey is present in all mine and all mills environmental effect monitoring program. There is an exemption that is available for mines or mills whose effluent is less than 1% concentration in the environment within 250 meters of their final effluent discharge point. What that means is that beyond the 250 meter distance, if effluent is less than 1%, then a fish survey exemption can be granted. And this is essentially because the difficulty of conducting a fish survey in such a small area when fish are transient or mobile in and out of a plume that's that small, the presumption is that there would be no effect when the plume is so small. But for most mines, for example, very few mines would have a effluent dilution zone of 1% that is less than 250 meters. Gibraltar is one of them.
Thank you. And then my last question with respect to the PPR is at paragraph 266, just a bit above at page 100. And this paragraph lists 3 conditions of that are required. And are there other conditions or comments that should be added to help clarify this paragraph?
We just wanted to clarify that the conducting of an environmental effect monitoring program is a condition of deposit within the regulations, both PPER and MMER.
Mr. Hagan, earlier this morning there was a discussion about the knowledge that exists regarding historic mines that are now closed. What is the knowledge? What is your confidence with respect to the knowledge of the location of closed mines?
Yes, I would like to clarify that there is actually a fair bit known about closed mines in British Columbia. The Ministry of Mines in particular has a database called MinFile, which is an excellent resource for looking at which mines have operated in the past. It goes back over 100 years. There's quite a number of projects listed in there. I personally am familiar with that. There are 15 closed mines that process more than 100,000 tons of material in the Fraser Basin. And we would expect that the larger operations would probably have the more significant impact, or potentially the more significant impact. So we look at the larger operations, 15 greater than 100,000 tons in material processed during their lifetime. And I'm also aware there's at least 12 more that process 5,000 tons or more. And when it comes down to the much smaller operations, lower than that, this is something that very likely, the information about that is likely in MinFile. It can be found, but I don't have it at my fingertips, so to speak. Regarding closed mines, I would like to mention most of these mines we're familiar with. We know that they don't have an impact, or if they do have an impact.
Are there any
it,
concerns
being
about
managed.
mines that are closed? Or do you have any specific mines?
These are mines that are closed.
Right.
For example, the Samatozan mine north of Kamloops, that was a very small open pit mine that operated for a couple of years without a discharge. Subsequent to its closure, it generated some small acid rock drainage, which is under active management right now. And that's about the only closed mine that I'm aware of in the Fraser Basin that has a problem that is being managed.
Are there any significant new mines or new projects on the horizon that may affect the Fraser Basin?
Yes, we have a number of new projects that are either in the EA process or in pre-application. And some of these are quite large. You mentioned the closed open pit copper mines at Kamloops, New Afton, or Afton and Ajax are both in development to reopen and operate again. New Afton, I think, is very close to operating. They've got all their permits and certificates, and they'll use to operate an underground mine in the old pit. The Ajax mine is just starting into the EA pre-application process. Another project is Harper Creek, which is north of Kamloops, and that will be a fairly large open pit operation that will be entering the EA process shortly.
Okay.
Chumalibian
So-
mine, southeast of Prince George, is another fairly large mine that
So,
will be
Mr. Hagan,
there.
Mr. Hagan, oh, he can't hear me. Mr. Hagan, and so as we've just discussed earlier, those new mines that are coming on, they'll be going through an environmental assessment process. That's fair to say?
Yes, they will be going through an environmental assessment process.
Okay. And can you comment on placer mines and provide us with a definition of that and whether they're covered under the MMER?
Okay, placer mine operations are essentially operations that will process riverbed sediments, fluvial sediments, and filter out grains of gold usually from that sediment. Under the MMER, they are not considered mines. And we don't usually deal with placer operations in my section. But I would like to point out that some of these placer operations may have a very significant impact on the environment. Certainly, historically, that would have been the case.
And are there instances when a placer mine could be covered by the MMER?
In the instance where a placer mine, for example, brings in a backhoe and starts to evacuate bedrock and process that bedrock as ore, then it would actually come into the definition of an MMER mine.
Okay, thank you. And do you have any knowledge about the location of these placer mines in the Fraser River Basin?
Only generally the central area for placer operations now is probably the Quesnel River and also the Lightning Creek area downstream of Barkerville Wells area.
Thank you. Document from tab 9 that was entered this morning as Exhibit 1034. This is the National Assessment of Phase 1 data regarding metal mining. If we could turn to page 12 and 13 at the same time.
That's on the paper pages.
Oh, yes, I think. Yeah. Yes, that's that page, and then, yes, if they could go sideways, that'd be great. So this morning, Mr. Hagan, there was conversation about an overall conclusion of some inhibitory effects on fish from metal mining. And I'd like you to comment on the two graphs here with respect to results of pulp and paper as I understand, the one page, and the other one being, so the one there, this is on the right, we have the results of the pulp and paper studies, and on the left, we have a result of the metal mine studies with respect to impacts on fish. And with those two figures up, could you explain the relationship between these two graphs?
Yes, we thought these two diagrams here would be a very helpful way of viewing what the overall national assessment conclusions are when we talked about national assessment reports. So if you look at the diagrams, you'll see a vertical line in the middle above 0, 0 on the horizontal axis. If the horizontal lines, one for each parameter, if those horizontal lines intersect the vertical line, then the conclusion would be no effect on that parameter, generally speaking, in the national perspective. So if you look at pulp and paper first, because we talked about that first, figure 5, we talked about a general stimulatory effect on fish. And you can see that on condition, liver, weighted age, and age on the diagram are to the positive side on the right side of that vertical line. We talked about an inhibitory effect on gonad side, and again that vertical line for gonads is on the negative or the left side of that vertical line. And so if you look at figure 4, for 3 of those fish parameters, the horizontal line intersects the vertical line at 0, so we conclude, generally speaking, no effect on a national basis.
And for the record,
but the condition is to the left, so we've got an inhibitory effect on fish from mining. And it's interesting that the direction is opposite for fish versus pulp and paper.
Right, and figure 4 is for metal mines, and figure 5 is for pulp and paper. Can we learn anything about these two graphs as to a cumulative impact analysis?
I think what they do tend to do is illustrate how challenging it would be to do a cumulative effect assessment. If you're bringing in pulp and paper where you've got inhibitory or stimulation versus metal mining, you've got inhibition. And then you start asking, what is the effect if you've got these combined? Is there an additive effect, or is it a synergetic effect or antagonistic effect? And then thirdly, if you start considering the other discharges that are present in the basin from urban effects, agriculture, municipal wastewaters, I think it illustrates that cumulative effects is a real challenge to do.
We could then move to, in the interest of time, I'll keep moving on that conversation, but if we could go then to, Mr. Lund, to Exhibit 2 of Canada's binder of documents. It's a 2002 document on clean, safe water. And Ms. Boyd, can you identify this document for us and explain whether this is a helpful document for us to understand the work on of the pulp and paper, regarding the pulp and paper industry?
The short answer is I guess it just gives a quick summary after 10 years of pulp and paper being in place, and the pulp and paper effluent regulations being in place, the updated ones plus the 2 SEPA regulations, which are also listed on that document. And it just gives a quick snapshot that I think is effective, just to see the degree to which the mill effluent was improved. Doesn't mean that we don't have room to go from there, but I think it's good to show kind of the relative change in those effluents.
Okay, thank you. If that could be marked as the next exhibit.
1038.
And Ms. Boyd, earlier we spoke about, and just now we spoke about studies being done on resident fish with respect to, now just for clarity on the record, has there any work been done on sockeye salmon as a resident fish?
Not as a resident fish for EEM, because it's to us not considered a resident.
Right.
It's just one that's there, essentially exposed to the effluent on a daily basis. That's what we're targeting for EEM.
Right. In your opinion, does the pulp and paper effluent today have an impact on Fraser River sockeye salmon?
The short answer is that we don't know because we don't design our studies for sockeye salmon specifically, but I guess the intent is that if we looked at resident species, that would be, it could be used to compare with a species that's moving through. So I guess we would consider they would be less likely to be affected by it because of that being transient. Migrating. Transient.
And if we could then move to document tab 13 from the Commission's list that was marked this morning as Exhibit 1030. And if this is a study of the Upper Fraser River environmental effects. And Ms. Boyd, is this perhaps the best data that we have on the Upper Fraser River before us? This paper?
Well, I guess I referred to that in terms of the effects results and in discussions this morning, primarily because those are the largest mills on the river.
Okay.
Sorry.
So I'm aiming to move through I've got a short period of time.
Yep.
If we could move to page 21 of 161. And if we could look at this tab, figure 2.2, can you describe for the benefit of the Commissioner what this figure tells us?
Well, I guess it's just a useful document to just see what happened with, this is just an example of the Canfor Northwood Mill, and to show how the changes in the loadings were affected by the regulations coming in. If you see in kind of the 1982 era, there was a sharp increase in your suspended solids and biochemical oxygen demand, and that was actually, the mill had an increase in production. They had a major expansion. But then when the regulations came into place in 1992, the mill had actually started to ramp up for those regulations, and you can see where the AOX, which can be simulate the dioxins and furans as well, but the sharp decrease from the regulations in place, actually federal and provincial, for the and also for the BOD and TSS. So I just thought it was something that quickly captured the scenario for the changes in the regulation.
Thank you. If we could then move to tab 10 of Canada's list of documents. A map. And Ms. Boyd, do you know who created this map?
Well, Mike originally created the map, and I just keep changing it as mills change or the status change. But it's a useful summary of the pulp mills in BC. It shows the current names, and it shows the status of some of the closed mills that are no longer PPR mills, and it updates the Collodi et al. 1999, which is, I forget which number it is on our documents, but
Okay.
The short of it is an update to current mill names and status.
Okay, thank you. If this could be marked as the next exhibit.
1039.
And if we could then have Mr. Lund, a document marked this morning from tab 15 of the Commission's documents, Exhibit 1026, brought up. And there was a discussion regarding the abstract at Roman numeral 3, and a conversation ensued with the word eutrophication being raised. And I'm wondering if we can just have a definition of what eutrophication is.
I guess the short answer is just it's a gradual nutrient enrichment of an area. So it starts as oligotrophic, and then gradually as nutrients are added to the system, either naturally or, it's man-made contributions, it becomes nutrient enriched, or eutrophic is the term.
Thank you. Those are all my questions.
Thank you. Ms. Robotham for the province is next. She thinks she can finish in 20 minutes.
Good afternoon. I'm Elizabeth Robotham for the province, and with me is my colleague Boris Tizet. I have a few questions. First question, I'd like to go to PPR 15, please, paragraph 65. So, Mr. Hill, perhaps you can help me out here. They say that in paragraph 65 that July 2004, the Environmental Management Act came into force, and it combined the former Waste Management Act and the former Environmental Management Act to create a single statute governing environmental protection and management in the province. Is that, in your view, is that correct, or are there other statutes and regulations governing the environment?
Yeah, there are other statutes that deal with environmental matters such as Water Act, Fish Protection Act, aspects of the Mines Act. Those would be some examples.
All right, thank you. With respect to paragraph 66, the first sentence says that the EMA is less prescriptive than the former Waste Management Act. Do you think that's correct, or is it differently prescriptive than the former Waste Management Act?
I'm not exactly sure what's intended by prescriptive, but I could describe the change that happened when there was a switch from the Waste Management Act to the Environmental Management Act, and that was that previously all waste discharges could not happen without a permit from any type of business. And under the Environmental Management Act, there was a regulation called the Waste Discharge Regulation, where different types of businesses were prescribed, along with some activities. Particular types of activities were prescribed for which discharges were prohibited without a permit. But there still remained the general provision not to cause pollution, whether you were prescribed or not.
And if we can go to paragraph 70. Paragraph 70 says that there is no permit is required, no site-specific permit or other waste discharge authorization is required for activities, industries listed in Schedule 2. That's just for clarification, that presumes that there is a code of practice in place, correct?
Yes, if an activity or a business is prescribed in Schedule 2, they may not discharge without a permit, or in the alternative, if there's a code of practice, they would register and discharge under authority of that code of practice.
And I think at paragraph 1, footnote 145, as a footnote states that a person is exempt from subsection 6 and sub 2 and 6 sub 3 of the Act in relation to discharge the environment of coarse coal, refuse, waste rock, or overburden. An effluent permit would still be required in those circumstances. Is that correct?
Yes, and that provision existed as well under the Waste Management Act regime. This particular exemption just deals with the rock dump piles, the rock itself, but if there was effluent coming from that rock pile that was being collected and released, then the requirements to get a permit would still apply. The exemption is just for the rock itself.
And if we could turn to paragraph 288 of the PPR, please. It states here, paragraph 288, that Environment Canada observed in 2008 that the Provincial Ministry of Environment has significantly reduced its inspections of mines, so it is no longer possible to conduct coordinated site inspections. Would you agree that the province has significantly reduced its inspection of mines?
Well, in my experience in dealing with mines from approximately late 90s to present, in the Caribou region, we've maintained a fairly constant frequency of inspections of the mines.
My next question is still within the PPR, but it's paragraph 7. Mr. Grace, if you could help me out here. I take you to the last sentence of that paragraph. It states municipal wastewater effluents are also a source of PPDEs and which are used as a fire retardant. Is it more correct to say that municipal wastewater may be a transport mechanism rather than a source?
Well, you're getting into definition there. I mean, basically PBDEs are found in most combustible materials, including in this room. They tend to be very widespread. It's not something that's put in there intentionally, as in bodily waste, but it does get in there as a, because it just comes from everything. Laundry, computer screens.
Mr. Hill, when dealing with non-compliance issues with respect to permits, is there a provincial requirement to, a regulatory requirement to report all non-compliances or certain types of non-compliances?
Well, there is the spill reporting regulation, which requires that spills or any unauthorized releases exceeding certain thresholds must be reported in accordance with the procedures in that regulation.
So it need not be put out in the permit that all exceedance, all non-compliance issues have to be reported, because the regulation will capture some of the more significant ones that will have significant short-term environmental effects.
Yeah, the regulation would capture significant unauthorized releases to the environment, and those would have to be reported immediately.
And the consequences of failure to report those types of incidences?
Well, that's a violation. Can't quote you the section, but it is a violation that we have on occasion pursued.
So it is considered an offense not to report in those circumstances?
That is correct.
Thank you. Mr. Lund, if you could take me to the province's document. This document is entitled Review of Thompson River Partnership Monitoring Program. Mr. Grace, are you familiar with this document?
Yes, I am.
Can you provide me with a bit of background with respect to this document?
Basically, in 2003, the various agencies and dischargers who are required to monitor the Thompson River got together to do to combine and integrate their monitoring so that they could take advantage of not having to duplicate sampling at the same place or times, same parameters, that they could integrate their programs so that they could do the same thing and maybe free up some money to look at other issues. And that lasted, the program was for 6 years. It was partially part of the federal EEM process, but also part of the City of Kamloops Liquid Waste Management Plan. And the original plan was to do 3 years of monitoring before they changed to the new city sewage treatment plant. The plant wasn't built, although it's currently in the process of being constructed. So after the 3 years, we altered their discharge to mimic what would happen after their new sewage plant would be in force, and carried on for the other 3 years. So in 2010, we wanted to see, that was the end of that part of the program, so we wanted to see where should we go from here. And we thought that it would be good to have outside experts assess our program and report out on it and make recommendations. So this report is the result of that assessment.
And from this report, there were recommendations made and are in the process of being considered?
Yes, we had we have an annual meeting, but we had an extra meeting in the spring to go over the report with all the various partners and discuss all the recommendations in the report and whether we would be nice to do, should do, will do. Also, we need to coordinate all the various monitoring partners as to what parts of the program they would be doing And also, because there is money freed up, we also want to look at new upcoming issues. In fact, there is discussion about looking at emerging contaminants in EDCs.
And is this, is participation in this group voluntary?
Well, pretty much. We do have control over the permittees, but we haven't actually told them they must come and be part of this program. I think it's just something that everybody recognizes is a really good thing to do, and they come there voluntarily.
And can you remind us who the participants are?
Well, there's the Domtar Pulp Mill, the City of Kamloops sewage, well, City of Kamloops in general, mostly because of their sewage plant, Kamloops Indian Band, DFO, Environment Canada, the Thompson-Nicola Regional District, Village of Ashcroft, due to they both drink the water from the Thompson and discharge their sewage to it. Cooks Ferry Indian Band, Skeechuson Indian Band.
Thank you. May I have this marked as an exhibit, please?
Exhibit 1039.
Those are my questions.
Hearing now recessed until 5 after.